Once upon a time, in a small city in the eastern part of Nigeria, there was a couple, Amadi and Uli. They loved each other very much. Amadi was a rich businessman. He sold building materials at the market. His wife, Uli, was his treasure. She was very beautiful and Amadi spoilt her silly. She didn't lack anything. Her husband, Amadi, would not let her lift a finger to do anything. He hired a chef, a cleaner, a driver, and a housekeeper. He bought her gifts almost every day and pampered her. Uli loved and honored her husband in turn, and they were very fond of each other. Friends and family envied them. Amadi's friends would always tease him, saying he lives in his wife's wrappers. Whenever his friends want to hang out, they would make jest of Amadi, saying he should make sure he takes permission from his wife before coming out. But no matter how many times his friends mocked or teased him, he would just laugh along, saying he loves his wife and cannot bear to be away from her for long. He would call her on the phone countless times a day, whenever he was away from home, just to make sure she was okay. Uli seemed to love the attention she was getting. 5 years after they got married, Uli took in. Amadi was over the moon. Severally, he had had conversations with his wife of what their children would look like, who they would take after, and how they would spoil them. It seemed a long time before their wishes came through, but they were glad it finally did. Amadi paid more attention to his wife than ever before. He came home early, cancelled hangouts with friends, and spoilt Uli even more. Uli glowed. Pregnancy seemed to suit her so well. Before long, she started experiencing morning sickness. It bothered Amadi very much, but the doctors assured him it was normal. Uli was never one to fall sick. Her immune system seemed well built. But early on in her second trimester, she fell seriously ill. The sickness took a toll on her body. Her doctors battled to keep her blood pressure under control, but it would spike every now and then, putting Uli in a very precarious condition. Her doctors had suggested taking out the baby at 5 months after warning Uli and Amadi of the possible dangers. Uli refused, said she would carry her baby to full term. Amadi was torn between saving the life of his wife or unborn child, but he chose to stand by his wife. The doctors battled to keep her stable. By the end of the second trimester, Uli's condition had deteriorated. Without a second thought, Amadi gave the doctors permission to take out the baby. A cesarean section was done and the baby was taken out. Both Uli and the baby were put in intensive care. Few hours after the cesarean section was carried out, Uli slipped into a coma. Amadi was devastated. The doctors did all they could for her, but after 1 week, she passed on. Amadi broke down and could not be consoled. He blamed himself for not agreeing to the doctor's initial suggestion to take out the baby. He blamed God for giving him a child and taking his wife. Family and friends rallied around him to make sure he was okay, but Amadi could not be consoled. His perfect world had been shattered. He refused to see his son, said he didn't want to have anything to do with the baby, and also blamed the baby for Uli's death. Weeks later, the baby was taken out from the intensive care unit. Uli's mother was there to take care of her grandson. The moment she laid eyes on the baby, she broke down. He looked so much like his mother. A few days later, they were discharged. Amadi asked his mother-in-law to take the baby and care for him. But Uli's mother suggested staying home with Amadi. She said it would be good for Amadi and the baby to bond. But Amadi said he wanted nothing to do with the child. His mother-in-law realized that he was still at a very bad place emotionally, so she thought it was wise to just live with the baby until Amadi was in a better place, hopefully soon. When she asked him what he wanted to name the baby, Amadi said he had no name for him. The coming months saw Amadi in the worst state ever. He became depressed and very irritable. His domestic staff had to walk on eggshells around him. He stopped going for his business, stopped taking his calls, stayed in his room all day and hardly ate his meals. His friends rallied around him. There was always someone with him just to make sure he didn't do anything stupid. They called the attention of his doctor, who came to the house on a regular basis to see how he was faring. And sometimes, when Amadi would go without sleep for days, he would medicate him to help him sleep. This went on for months. 1 year later, Amadi had started to interact. He even started going for his business again. But he was no longer the happy, smiling and bubbly person he used to be. He seemed quieter, sometimes aloof. He hadn't seen his son since the last time when his mother-in-law took him. He had never called to ask how he was faring, but he sent money to his mother-in-law monthly to take care of him. Meanwhile, his mother-in-law Ebele had named the baby Chikaodele, meaning it is left for God. Anytime she called Amadi on the phone, as soon as she mentioned the baby, Amadi would drop the call. Ebele could understand that he was still grieving, but to take it out on an innocent child was beyond understanding for her. One day, 15 months after Uli was buried, Ebele went to see Amadi. She tried to talk to him into having a relationship with his son, but he declined, saying he didn't want to come face to face with his tragedy. It broke Ebele's heart to see how low Amadi had fallen. The usual bubbly, happy, friendly person who came to marry her daughter Uli was gone. This Amadi was just a shadow. She went on to tell him about his son, but Amadi just sat through her monologue and never moved a muscle for expression of any kind. He simply said, "I will send you enough money for whatever you need." Amadi continued to live in solitude, never asking after or visiting his son. The last time he saw his son was the day his mother-in-law took him. But he continued to send money to Ebele every month. 10 years had passed since Uli died. Chikaodele had grown, not laying eyes on his father for one day. Amadi had moved away to another city, but kept contact with Ebele. The only time he called was to ask if there was anything she needed and to find out about her ailing health. The last 5 years had seen his mother-in-law become very sickly. Amadi had hired a live-in nurse to take care of them. He knew that if anything happened and Ebele was to pass on, he would be saddled with the responsibility of coming face to face with his son and taking care of him. A responsibility he had abandoned a decade ago. His friends and sisters tried to talk sense into him to accept his son, as his wife's death was nobody's fault. From time to time, his mother-in-law would send him pictures of Chikaodele, asking him to create space in his heart for his son. One day, Amadi's phone rang. It was the caregiver, Nurse Onyinye. For a while, Amadi just sat and watched the phone ring till the call ended, then came in again. He picked the phone. "Hello?" he said reluctantly. Finally, the news and day he dreaded. Nne Ebele had passed on. He dropped the phone and just sat motionless, staring into space. Nne Ebele had been buried. Amadi had taken Chikaodele along with him. The first time he laid eyes on him, he was taken aback. He had seen his pictures, of course, but the experience of seeing him face to face was nothing compared to seeing his pictures. He looked so much like his mother, Uli. Amadi had no idea what to do with him or how to take care of him. Was there anything good about this child? Amadi had wondered. If Uli hadn't gotten pregnant with him, she would still be alive. If he, Amadi, had listened and allowed the doctors take out the baby, Uli would still be around. Uli was gone, and now he is saddled with a son he had no idea how to take care of. And he got angry all over again. Amadi enrolled his son for his first year in secondary school. Chikodili was a very quiet child who talked very little. He seemed to have something on his mind always. He had never met his father. His grandmother had told him that his parents had been very fond of each other, and the death of his mother was a horrible blow to his father. Nnebele had also promised that his father would get over his grief and come around one day, but that was 10 years ago. Was 10 years not enough for someone to stop grieving? Does his father blame him for the death of his wife? Chikodili could not understand why his father wanted nothing to do with him. It was a question that has plagued him for so long. At school, he would watch other parents dropping off or picking up their kids, attend school events and programs, and he would feel so alone, wishing if only his father could just show up. When other kids spoke about their father, Chikodili would just listen and wonder what his father was like. On the days they were to write a descriptive essay about their parents, he would just pretend and imagine from the pictures he had seen. And his mother, he wished he had met her. He wished she didn't die giving birth to him. From the pictures he had seen of her, she was very beautiful. He wished she was alive today. Everything would have been perfect. Nnebele had done her best for him. She had showed him so much love and never failed to tell him that he was loved. But there was a void that Nnebele couldn't feel. A void that only a father could feel. Amadi had a cook that came in once every week to cook their weekly meals. So there was always food in the house. Nnebele had taught Chika well. He could do basically everything for himself. He was quite independent, and that was a lot of stress off Amadi's shoulders. Every school morning, the school bus would come for Chika and also bring him back home. Chika and his father lived in silence. They barely said a word to one another, only when it was necessary. Amadi always had an excuse whenever there was a need for him to show up at school. He was absent from PTA meetings, recitals, and open day. He buried himself in his work and couldn't see the harm he was doing to his son. 1 year had passed since Amadi started living with his son. He was at the office one day when his phone rang. He picked it up. It was the school principal. She was requesting his presence the next day at school. Amadi tried to excuse himself, but the principal said if he didn't show up, actions would be taken. The next day at 10 a.m., Amadi was at the principal's office. The principal, Mrs. Anene, first complained of his neglect to school invitations. Then she reported that Chikodili had been absent from school on a regular basis. In fact, he had only been to school 4 times since the last 2 weeks. She also reported that Chikodili was always aloof in class and never does his homework. The principal advised that he should find out what was wrong and fix it before it becomes too late. After Amadi left school, he went home straight. Chikodili was there. Amadi questioned him, demanding to know why he had not been going to school and where he had been. Chika said nothing. Amadi lost his temper and started yelling at him. Chika started crying and then shouted, "I want to go back home to Nne. I hate it here. I want Nne." "Nne is gone," Amadi yelled, "and she's never coming back. You better behave yourself and let this be the last time you are absent from school." With that, Amadi stormed out of his room. Chikodili laid down on his bed and cried himself to sleep. After Amadi left his son's room, he called the school to cancel Chikodili's school bus rides, saying he would drop him off at school every morning, but the school bus would bring him back home after school. And so, every morning, Amadi would drive his son to school. Their rides were usually silent, with Chika burying his face in his book or looking out the window. Amadi would often stare at his son through the rearview mirror. The resemblance to his late wife Uli was striking. One day, as Amadi was driving his son to school, Chika suddenly said, "Do you blame me for her death?" "What?" said Amadi. "Do you blame me for her death?" Amadi said nothing, and Chika continued, "You blame me for her death. I was just a baby." "Listen, we are not going to have this conversation," said Amadi, but Chika was already in tears. The cars had come to a stop, waiting for the traffic lights to turn green. Chika continued to cry, and Amadi, obviously irritated by his son, said, "I need some peace and quiet in this car. You are getting on my nerves with all that sound you are making." "I'm sorry for getting on your nerves. I'm sorry I killed your wife. I'm sorry I'm your son. I'm sorry I was ever born." Chika opened his door and ran out into the road. Just then, the lights went green, and it was too late. The driver of the car hadn't seen him. Amadi sat down at the reception of the emergency ward, 1,000 thoughts racing through his mind. What has he done? When did he become this person? This careless, selfish person? He lost his wife, but the boy lost his mother too. If Uli could see him now, would she be happy with the person he has become? How could he have blamed an innocent child for the death of his mother? Uli had died, but she had left him with a part of her, and this is how he treats it? This was his son, his only child. For the first time since Uli died, Amadi knelt down in tears and said a prayer to God. He asked God for forgiveness and prayed for mercy, for God to give him a second chance with his son. After what seemed like eternity, the doctors came out from the operating room to speak with Amadi. Chikodili had suffered an injury to his spine. His limbs were affected, causing partial paralysis. The doctors said with time and physiotherapy, he could regain the use of his legs. Amadi broke down and cried. The doctors also encouraged him to be hopeful and promised they would do all they could for him. Chikodili was unconscious for days, but by the 5th day after the surgery, he regained consciousness. All through that time, his father, Amadi, was by his side. He had messed up his son's life, and for that he was sorry. He apologized to his son and begged for forgiveness, hoping that it was not too late for reconciliation. He promised that he would do all and provide all that was required to make sure he regains the use of his legs. Chikodili was happy to finally have his father's love, attention and care, and said nothing else mattered. 2 weeks later, he was discharged from the hospital. Amadi hired a full-time nurse, a physiotherapist, and a home teacher to meet his son's needs. He vowed that never again would he allow anything to take his attention away from his only child. He had missed being a crucial part of his life, and for that he was sorry. But he was going to spend the rest of his life getting to know his son and winning his trust and respect. This was his gift from Uli, his late wife, and he is going to spend the rest of his life safeguarding him. Lessons to learn from this story. Children are a gift from God, and we must never blame a child for the conditions surrounding his or her birth. As parents, God has made us guardians of our children, and we will be held accountable for not doing what we should have done for them. We are to love and care for our children just as God loves and cares for us. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. If you enjoyed the story, then please give it a like.